The idea of a genre is often loose, hard to explain sometimes, and can be applied to many different things. In fact, the term hack and slash generally refers to a gameplay loop that emphasizes combat with melee weapons and sometimes projectile weapons. The term generally refers to action video games as well as role-playing games, with the latter's roots being solidified with basically murder hobo-style pen and paper RPG campaigns. This was eventually transitioned into role-playing games and then the ARPG, or action role-playing game. This series is focusing on the ARPG genre as a sort of first look for some, a long-form analysis of some other games I'm familiar with, or sometimes just a loose review of how the game is. But first, what is an ARPG? Well, it's basically an RPG that is in real time as opposed to turn-based or menu-based, with emphasis on character stats. Like I said, very vague. ARPGs are a subgenre of RPGs, so of course it's riding on the basis of what RPGs are. So, what's an RPG? Well, that's even more vague, with the idea coming from Dungeons & Dragons. There are a few cornerstones of what makes an RPG an RPG for sure, and if we wanted to be pedantic, we could simply define it as a game you roleplay in. However, that's basically every single game. Generally, in a role-playing game, you're not just dropped into the world with nothing said to you. The game will build up the setting. Where you are, why you're there, probably some big evil guy, and a reason to go about the whole game. Most games do this, of course. However, for a role-playing game, this is front and center, so you can play a role. Expansive dialogue options are also generally common in a role-playing game. One might think of Skyrim when you think of exploration, however most RPGs include dungeons with alternative dead-ended paths that contain loot, enemies, or shortcuts to the end. Most would consider exploration to be a tenet of roleplay game design, either if done by literally moving your character to the world, or reaching a nice little green box on the floor that lets you open a world map to travel. With quests being tied directly into story, main or side stories, they're often used to drive the player to explore, tying into exploration. Most people will also think of a reward for completing a quest. However, sometimes the reward is getting closer to beating the game, or a better stick of beating. Items. Everyone wants a shinier stick of beating, maybe a shield that looks cooler, or finding a really cool plasma gun. Maybe for rescuing the orphans, the player character is given a mace with specific effects. Either way, there are generally slots to equip this equipment and an inventory to hoard. Hold your random items you collect, like those potions you've been hoarding for the whole game and haven't used because you needed them, and oh god, it's the final credits and you've never used them. Most people who play a video game are familiar with items that are in a video game. From being able to cast a fireball or hit with a sword, the RPG formula will generally have formulas to determine if you hit the innocent townsfolk and how much damage something does to said entity. Generally, a role-playing game will involve attributes, success chances, which is reminiscent of dice rolling mechanics. Sometimes you're a specific person in this video game world, sometimes you create your own character, but most always you choose how your character is going to be played. You generally choose how to play that character by leveling up from gaining experience, either by killing enough goblins to make them eligible for the Endangered Species Act, helping Farmer Dan find his lost shovel, or by walking into a wall while crouching for 6 hours. Most RPGs will generally be the first two. So, here's the main difference. RPGs are like rectangles, while ARPGs are squares. All ARPGs are RPGs, but not all RPGs are ARPGs. The combat of an RPG can be anything with more of a focus on classical turn-based combat systems. Yeah, genres are vague. So, ARPGs are action, real-time, role-playing games. That's literally where the difference lies, in the fact that you move and do in real time. We can see plenty of games break this, however, like the first two Baldur's Gate games being a real-time RPG, classified just as an RPG. However, the term stuck onto Diablo, and the original Diablo became the more common standard for the term action RPG. So, we defined a RPG, and what an ARPG is. What's the point of doing this? basically to just tease what the series is going to contain. Genres are broad, and the RPG genre contain a lot of different games, and the ARPG genre as well. However, most people will think of Diablo, Path of Exile, maybe Dark Souls when they think of an ARPG. Some might include games like Destiny because you can grind for loot in them, while some would exclude it since it doesn't have the RPG elements. For the sake of this series, anything will most likely go. However, I will define that an ARPG must have these core tenets, generally in order of what most players of the genre care about. Combat. Probably the most important due to the core gameplay loop revolving around it, as most ARPGs involve New Game Plus modes that increase the difficulty for more playthroughs. Abilities such as spells or skills flesh out the combat, and generally you're looking at building a character how you want to play it. Exploration. As I said before, you either need such a varied game world, such as with open world games, or you need a robust random generation system like with Diablo-style ARPGs, due to multiple playthroughs of it. Item variety. The original Diablo was born out of a desire to collect loot, randomly generated loot in fact, so there's many different options for the player. However, Souls-like games are technically part of the ARPG genre, and I don't remember finding a Black Knight greatsword that gave +3 to dex and increased your poise, so that's why it's kind of in the middle. Attributes and skill points. Most ARPGs follow the same ideas, having attribute points. Basically, every single game that will be in this series will involve some sort of point that you have the choice of putting into something that will cause you to be stronger. Abilities do tie directly into the combat, however. Levels and experience. Do you think this would be higher up, the idea of gaining levels and increasing with power? However, it's basically tied with attributes at least. Still kind of important though. You could theoretically have an ARPG game without leveling up. Just look at the Souls community. You'll see there's an entire playthrough called Soul Level 1. Also, a lot of games these days involve scaling enemies, so a lot of people argue whether or not leveling up is really even a good thing. Just look at Oblivion, and you'll have people saying leveling up just makes things harder. However, that's not every game that I'm going to be covering in this series. Story and quests. For me, it's important, however, let's be honest here. The people who play the isometric style of ARPG will generally rush as fast as they can to the endgame to begin farming, so they can get into the early gold rush of trading. Games more like Dark Souls, you'll have people who actually know the story. I unfortunately place story and quests at the very bottom of this list, not because I think ARPGs have no story or can't have a story, but because a lot of the ARPG genre is played post-story. The story is enjoyed for the first playthrough, and then for 1,000 hours later after the story has been completed, the player is still playing the game. So, with those 6 elements, if enough of them are in a game, I'll consider it an ARPG, with combat being the main focus and thing you do. There will also most likely be games that are just tagged with ARPG that I'll make videos on in this series. While the first real ARPG can be traced back to the dungeon crawling game called Dungeon Master, however, I would argue that Diablo 1 is basically what defined the genre. I was going to start with Diablo 1, however, unfortunately, I'm looking at the script that I wrote for the video, and it's 46 pages and 20,211 words. And Diablo 4's release is literally right around the corner, so the first video is going to be of Diablo 4. But, like I said, this video is just to define the genre and tease what's to come. I'll be streaming somewhat regularly over on Twitch, maybe releasing a random video here and there of other content, and for this series, expect some smaller videos every couple weeks with maybe longer videos spread throughout. Either way, like I said, the next video will be about how Diablo 4 is on launch. I played bits and pieces of the beta, so at least I know what I'm getting into. But when this video drops, I'll most likely be either streaming a lot of Diablo 4 or something else depending on how it really goes. But that's me. I have links in the description and on screen now for where to find me. Bye.